Hello and welcome to Answering Bart Ehrman, the channel where we read Bart Ehrman's books and answer what he says point by point. And we're going to continue doing that. And I'll hand over to you, Matthew, if you can read for us the next part of what Bart Ehrman claims about the Bible.
Thanks, Sam. Yeah, we're up to page 7. We're just continuing on from where we were last episode, where Ehrman talked about Jesus cleansing the temple. And so he's continuing from that. He says, historically speaking, then the accounts are not reconcilable. We showed last episode they are. But he continues from there. The same can be said of Peter's denials of Jesus. In Mark's gospel, Jesus tells Peter that he'll deny him 3 times before the cock crows twice. In Matthew's gospel, he tells him it'll be before the cock crows. Well, which is it? Before the cock crows once or twice?
Okay, so is it before the cock crows once or twice? So this is the contradiction that he's saying is there in the Bible. Okay, in one it says once, the cock crows once, in the other it says twice. Well, let's have a look at these verses.
Yep.
So Mark 14, verse 30, and Jesus said to him, truly, I tell you, this very night before the cock crows twice, you will deny me 3 times. And then in Matthew, Jesus said to him, truly, I tell you, this very night before the cock crows, you will deny me 3 times.
So where's the contradiction?
So but Ehrman is saying that this is this contradiction. I mean, he's been saying in all the previous pages that the Bible's full of contradictions, and this is the example that he's now giving. Now, I want to say this is not a contradiction at all. There's no contradiction here. First of all, there's overwhelming agreement. Jesus is speaking to the same group of people. He talks about Peter denying him 3 times. Mark is simply giving more detail about how many times the cock will crow. Mm-hmm. Whereas Matthew's just saying before the cock crows. Now, notice Ehrman has actually had to add in the word once into Matthew's account, right? Because he says here, how many times was it, once or twice? Well, does Matthew actually say once? Matthew doesn't say once. Matthew just says before the cock crows. I mean, it's just a general statement. So there's simply no contradiction here. There's simply no contradiction. There's just one is giving a bit more information than the other, but that's it.
It's a bit worse than that, isn't it, Sam? Because it's Ehrman has created the problem by inserting the word once, but it's worse than that as well, because he's actually been dishonest in doing that. He's misrepresenting it deliberately to make his point, which is really important to notice if you're somebody who thinks Bart Ehrman is a trustworthy expert on these things.
A really good point. Yes. Yeah, please check what Bart Ehrman says. He's had to add in words to make his point. Now, he does a similar thing in that he now gives an illustration of a Christian trying to solve what he sees as a contradiction. So I'm going to read this out, and then I'll get you to make some comments on it.
Great.
And where are we? When I was in college, I purchased a book that was intent on reconciling differences of this kind. It was called The Life of Christ in Stereo. The author, Johnston Cheney, took the 4 gospel accounts and wove them into one big mega gospel to show what the real gospel was like. For the inconsistency in the accounts of the denials of Peter, the author had a very clever solution. Peter actually denied Jesus 6 times, 3 times before the cock crowed, and 3 more times before it crowed twice. This can also explain why Peter denies Jesus to more than 3 different people or groups of people in the various accounts. But here again, in order to resolve the tension between the Gospels, the interpreter has to write his own Gospel, which is unlike any of the Gospels found in the New Testament. And isn't it a bit absurd to say that, in effect, only my Gospel, the one I created from parts of the 4 in the New Testament, is the right one, and that the others are only partially right? So there's the example he gives of a Christian trying to solve what's not even a contradiction, but the example he gives. What's he doing here, Matthew?
Well, he says that Christians are being absurd trying to pull this thing together. I think he's being absurd, actually. We all know that there's books out there that get the Bible wrong. So there's no surprise you could find a book that gives a very bad explanation for a problem that doesn't exist. And we both agree that's a bad explanation. I think I've never come across somebody trying to explain this problem in such a convoluted way, or even that it's a problem. But so I agree that's a bad example, a bad non-solution. But honestly, it's just a straw man, isn't it?
Yeah.
He's trying to portray this as these are the depths that Christians have to stoop to solve these enormous problems in the Bible, which is just silly. It's also the way Ehrman describes people comparing the gospel accounts is really important to notice. Talking about, you have to go and create your own gospel by stitching these things together to create your own version of it to make it make sense. That's not the sinister activity that Ehrman kind of makes it out to be. That's just normal history. If you've got multiple witnesses witnessing to the same historical event, then you're going to compare them responsibly to see how they match up and how they relate to each other. That's just normal historical reading of texts. And as we've just seen, these two are very easy to match up, aren't they? It's just the level of detail is different. So we're believing one historical gospel about Jesus, about events that really happened and are really actually historically trustworthy.
Yeah. When I was reading that, I thought this is just a straw man. He takes the worst possible example he can find of a Christian trying to solve this so-called problem. He could have found a much better example, but he takes the most ridiculous one and says, look, this is all Christians can do, right? So one, he misrepresents Matthew and Mark by saying, it was only once. So he's not even being honest there. And then he takes the worst example of what a Christian can do and says, this is all Christians can do, when the whole time, as we've seen, there's no problem. So, yeah. Anyway.
It's not a compelling case.
No. Well, look, I think we'll finish up there for that example. Please join us next episode where we're going to be looking at the tomb of Jesus and who did the women see at the tomb. And this is a bit more popular one that I've heard people bringing up, to say what happened at the resurrection of Jesus and what did people see. And so we're going to be diving into that and what Ehrman says about it next week. So we'll see you then.